Okay, thanks for that waiting. I know it was longer than expected. So the idea here is that we have like a nice conversation. You can, of course, make questions in the chat or unmute yourself when prompted. And as always, all the material from this call will be available on Box. Now, for the announcement, please remember to check out IPA's research misconduct policy, which has all the links in the agenda. Also remember that guards can. Okay, thank you. Now, remember that guards can also provide support for SMS surveys or WhatsApp surveys using Twilio. And recently, we have been testing and adding also help with with Engage Spark, which was shown to the research managers. For now, GATS still has very limited availability for direct technical support. So please try and reach out early to schedule if needed. And for now, please continue using Myra. That will prepare you for the Rockers and the upcoming Myra dashboard in Power BI. Also remember that you have technical influencers that you can reach out in almost every office. And if your office doesn't have one, try to reach to your manager and propose somebody for that role. And as always, the inbox is open at researchsupport.povertyaction. Also, a reminder that the MicroMaster courses started May 21st, and there are no course fees for JPAL affiliate staff. So just go to the Global Help Desk article in case you have more doubt about that. And now we will have Ishmael sharing and showing us about the DMS 4.0. So Ishmael, the floor is yours. I can see your screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. Hello again to everyone. Finally, we are ready to discuss the DMS 4.0. I'm very excited to show you the new features and what we've been working on all this while. Yeah. So I will just proceed. This presentation is going to be in two formats. The first is I'm going to go through some slides, just telling you a little bit about the DMS 4.0. And the second part is just going to be a more hands-on training where I would open up, like I would go through the process of setting it up, so you can like have a feel of how it is to set it up, and then also show you what the output looks like. Yeah, so let's get into it. And just to let you know, once we are done today, I think it would be best if like you people pay more attention to what I'm doing and then like ask questions. Because after this we would have about 4 hours immediately after this call that people can like book 15-minute slots to discuss challenges that they may have trying to set it up by themselves. Okay, so let's proceed. So the first thing that I want to talk about is why we are doing this updates to DMS 4.0. The DMS 4.0 is a working visual update. The current version that we have is 3.0, so this is just an upgrade. And this is usual. After some number of years, we make an update. The last major update was in 2018. We wanted to add some new features and improve some of the features as well. And then also to improve the runtime and reliability of the DMS. So these are improving the runtime and reliability is the main thing that we really wanted to achieve with this DMS. So as you start to use it, if you are having like serious challenges with runtime and reliability, please feel free to let us know so we can see how best we can improve that as well. As you, most of you may know, the DMS is an ever evolving project. It's always we are always working on it, even when we are not doing a major update. There may be bug fixes, there may be like some new small features that we need to add, and then we do that all the time. So yeah, feel free to let us know once you start using it. So the pictures that we have here are just to show you what some of the outputs look like. What we have at the top here with all the colors in green and yellow is basically a different implementation of the IPA check time use. And we will talk more about that when we get to time use, but some of you may already be familiar with time use. IPA check time use, it basically shows you which parts of the day the enumerators are most active. And it also shows you based on the different days that you, there's a second sheet to this. It's just not this one. This is just to let you see what it looks like. And this other sheet that has like orange in it down here is a picture of the summary sheet of the survey dashboard. So we will get to that as well, and you would see how it works. But basically, it gives you some information about your data set, like general information about your data set. You know, we have an enumerator dashboard, but we don't have a survey dashboard. So if you wanted to know, like in general, what is the percentage of missing values you have in your data set, this would be the place to go. Yeah. All right. So one of the main things that you would find is that there are some new folder and file structure. So the folder structure has changed just slightly, very, very slightly. Some people may not, you may not really notice that it's different unless you look, but the file structure has changed quite a bit. So now we have a new master do file, which would be a do file that like runs all the other do files. We have a global do file, which is used to do a lot of the inputs. And this has become necessary because we did some, you know, we asked some of our colleagues what they wanted to improve with the new DMS. Most people preferred, most people didn't really like the XLS input sheets. So initially, when we made the XLS input sheet, the idea was to make a DMS that is simple enough for people with very minimal data skill to set up. But it looks like it's a little bit confusing for some people, and people also generally just like the feel of working in a do file. You know, so we can do things a little bit more complicated. Working in a do file like allows you to be a little bit more flexible with the way you deal with your inputs instead of the Excel sheet. So we still have an Excel input sheet, but that is now just limited to only the commands that we really need an Excel sheet. And those ones that are like simple enough to just enter like a few things in the do file would move into the global do file. So this is where you would set a lot of things that you need to run. This is something that some people are already using. So for instance, I know in Ghana we've been using a global do file for a while, but this is not like general practice for everyone. Then we'll also have a sample prep do file, and I'm very specific about saying that this is a sample because it will not meet the needs of every project. But basically, what we've tried to do here is put together a list of preparatory phase code that people would need to prepare their data for HFC. So basically, this would be a file that you would open and like edit to meet the needs of your project. In most cases, it should be fine and cover what you need. And in other cases, you may need to add additional preparatory steps or remove some of the preparatory steps if it's not necessary for you. And another cool feature is that we've now included some code to automatically create date folders for the output. So now when you run, it will log all the output into a specific date folder. And then the next day when you run it, will log into a different date folder. So this allows you to like keep track of, some of the changes, some of the HFCs that you've been doing. And you can see like how many times, if you're an array, for instance, it would be easy for you to check how frequently you've been running your HFC by just like going in there and looking at the different folders. An array, if you're an RM, you could also check that for your enumerators as well. Sorry, for your full stuff as well. No, not your full stuff, for your array. Yeah, so this is basically what it looks like. So this is what the folder structure looks like. And here we have the do files that are available for you to use and edit. And then down here is the folder structure. All right, so other major changes. There have been some changes to the formatting structure. So you would see that for some of the commands, we've taken out the colors. And then we've taken out some of the lines. The lines may not be very obvious, but we've taken out some of the colors. We've taken out some of the formatting that are not very, very necessary in favor of a faster runtime, because those things like slow down, slow everything down. We've also changed the output format of some of the commands. So for instance, IPHX dupes would give you an Excel sheet that has the summary of the duplicates, and also another Excel sheet that gives you another sheet that has like more details on the differences, right? That particular implementation was very, very resource consuming and took a long time to work, and was also very prone to crash. So we've basically changed and moved that away into a DTA format. So you will still have a data set that tells you what the that will give you more information on the duplicates, but it will be a DTA file and not an XLS. We've also allowed for more flexibility with the use of wildcards in the input. Yeah, in the input sheet when appropriate. So now you would be able to use wildcards in the input sheet to make it easier for you to input specifically things that come from like repeat groups. But you could also use it for non-repeat group items as well. So we've also limited the input files to only necessary commands. Other inputs will go into the globals do file. So now we have only 3 commands that require the input sheets. All the other ones you don't require the input sheet. Once you set up your globals do file, then you're good to go. IPHX outliers will now allow for disaggregation of outliers by groups. So for instance, if you want to check outliers in income by employment type, right? So you may want to also check for maybe harvest by gender or by like location. So let's say if you know that like you expect that harvest will be higher in a particular location because of the type of soil or for some other reason per acre, you can't indicate that you want the outliers to be checked by those locations. If you're also interested in checking like grouping in by like treatment status or other status as well, you could also do that as well. Yeah, IPHX outliers also allow us for combining of variables when checking for outliers. And this is also very, very useful for variables that were collected in repeat groups. So let's say you have like a repeat group, and in that repeat group, you are collecting, let's say, income data for household members, and you want to check for outlier. In some cases, you may want to it would be nice to consider them as one variable when you are checking for outliers. So basically, what it's going to do is going to use all the data to calculate all the data from the different variables to calculate the standard deviation, interquartile range, and all the other things that it needs to check for outliers. So this would help you avoid situations where you would see some values flagged as outliers for one of the repeat variables, but not as an outlier for the other one, because the other one only has 2 observations and then one has 500. So this basically allows you to combine them and get a more useful a more useful range for flagging your outliers. IPA track survey, formerly prog reports. So IPA track survey has been upgraded to have the capabilities of prog reports, and also now includes now allows you to use a tracking data set instead of a master data set. So basically, the tracking data set would be a data set that would contain targets for groups. So for instance, if you want to track by district, you could just indicate in the tracking data set what your target is for each of the districts, and it would compare that to your survey data set. The advantage that this gives you is that now when you are running a census, you can run IPA, you can run track surveys on your census data set, and it would help you keep track of your census. Prog reports couldn't really work with census data set because you need to preload. You need a preload data set that it would match with, but this time you no longer need that. So this can work with census data sets as well. Any questions so far before I move on? And as I move on, if you have questions, you can put them in the chats. When I take breaks, I can try to answer them before I proceed. But I'll allow some few seconds to see if there's a question. All right, thank you very much. So I'll proceed. Yeah, so we also have some new commands, IPA check missing, which exposes missingness and distinctness statistics for each variable. And this is basically a command that will replace IPA check all miss and IPA check no miss. We also have IPA check time use, which, sorry about the text, which shows statistics on the time of the day that your field team is most active. And this is basically taking the idea of SCTU time use that was originally written by William Blockman. IPA check survey dashboard, which I already mentioned, would export general statistics about your data sets. IPA check specify recode would help you recode your other specify values. We've also added a bunch of commands. Some of them are commands that are not checks, but would be useful for other things. And there are other commands that we use when building the check commands that we think could be useful for other people to use as well. So we've added those as well. So you have the IPA check codebook command, which generates a nicely formatted Excel codebook with an option to use the notes as labels. So for those of you who have been working with codebooks, you would notice that one of the bigger issues with most codebook with working with data sets is that the labels are limited to 80 characters. And in most cases, you have labels that are longer than 80 characters. So when you generate a codebook, it's just truncated to 80 characters. So this basically allows you to also use your notes. So when you're working with Survey CTO data, when you run the Survey CTO import do file, it usually would keep the full label in the notes. So instead of using the label, you could use the notes instead. Then we have IPA SCTO collate, which collates and exports a data set of the Survey CTO generated text orders and comment files. This is useful in that you can create and export the data and use it for other things. And then this also allows us to avoid repetition, where if you have two commands that use the text audit data set. So for instance, IPA check text audit uses that, and IPA check time use also uses the text audit data set. So you don't have the collation, you don't do the collation twice, you only do it once. And an additional thing is that if the data set that you want to save already exists, this command would basically compare it to what it needs to import, and then only imports the new media files. So this command probably will save you a lot of time. We also have IPA check labels, which removes labels from values and variables. IPA gets TD, which converts data and variable to dates. Get cal that creates a calendar data set, and then any counts that returns the number of variables in a value that contain the specific values, integer or string values as you specified. We also have a meta library that contains a bunch of meta commands. And these commands are just used, is what we use to format the Excel output. So sometimes some people want to know how it's done, and we've basically just compiled this into a meta library to make it easier for you to use. Some of them are simple enough that you probably don't really need the meta library, but it will save you code. So you could do this in one line instead of like maybe 5 lines. Any questions before I move on? Let me check if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, no questions. Okay, so we've also discontinued some commands. IPA-check logic. We will provide code snippets for these commands that have been discontinued. IPA-check logic, IPA-check consent, IPA-check dates. And for IPA-check dates, we've included some code in the prep-do file to check critical issues that may come with the dates. IPA-check follow-up. IPA BC stats can basically do what IPA-check follow-up is doing, so we've taken that out as well. And no miss and all miss have been combined into IPA-check missing. IPA-check imports is no longer necessary, so that has also been discontinued as well. So finally, the release dates is that we've already published everything that is necessary to be able to use a DMS 4.0. So as I speak right now, the DMS 4.0 is publicly available for anyone who wants to use it. It's exactly the same link for the DMS 3.0. So if you want to use it, you can just like go in there and look at it. I would go to that page right now and show you a few things. Yeah, so let me just do that instead. One second. Yeah, so here is everything that's already there. So you can go in, there's a README, you can read to see the different commands that we have, and you can install. You can install the command as well. There's a wiki page that has like more information about the DMS, and there is an exercise that you can go through to give you a better understanding of how the DMS works. Before I do the practical session, I would pause for questions. So just to be sure I'm not talking to myself, Carlos, or can someone just?
Yeah, we are
Okay.
here. It seems like there are no questions so far. Maybe
Okay.
with the practical session.
Yes. All right, thank you. Yeah, so great. We'll start the practical session. So as you know, the first thing you need to do is you will need to install the commands. Unfortunately, you won't be able to do that with just IPA-check updates. You would actually need to run the install command again to get 4.0. But before I talk about that, just a word of caution. It is slightly different. Well, it is quite different from the DMS 3.0. So if you install it, some of your commands will no longer work, especially the ones that have the exact same name with what is in 4.0, because the syntax is different, and your current DMS that you already have would not work if you install this. However, before uploading this, we have created a release for the final version of the version 3. So after this training, if you already have your HFC set up and you need to run it again, you can reinstall the version 3 by when you come to the page and you look at the releases, you have it on the right here. You can see the version 3.0, and you can download it and reinstall it. Reinstall the version 3.0, so you can continue running your HSCs. But if you also want to like move to the 4.0, then you can set it up for your project as well. Okay, so just Installing it is almost the same. You basically run the net install command that is up here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste in its data, and I already have it installed. So like depending on the internet, this might you know, be a little bit slow, but once you run that, it would install all the files for you. 1 second. Okay, so I have everything already up to date, so it didn't install anything for me. But you also need to run, after you install it for the first time, you need to run IPA check updates. This is what will allow the libraries, the meta libraries to install. So you run IPA check updates. Once you install it, whenever you need to install it again, you can just run IPA check updates. If there's like a new version or something, it will just install that directly. But if you're using the 4.0 for the first time, you need to run the net install command. So we have the libraries installed as well. And if you want to check the version of the DMS that you have, you can basically type IPA check versions, IPA check version, and it would give you a list of all the commands and the latest version that you have, including the date of release. And this is very useful for us, maybe when we are troubleshooting later. If someone has a problem with the latest version of a command, they can type in IPA check updates, and then they can see everything. And just like with the old one, there's a help file for all the commands, and you can like pull out the help file for each of the commands by just typing help and the name of the specific command. There's also a help file for all the meta libraries. Now, if you don't want to think too much about it and you just want to like pull them up easily, you can just look at the help file for IPA check. And in the help file for IPA check, when you scroll down, when you go to the bottom, you can find a link to the help file for all the other commands. So if you just want to check something, you can always come back to IPA check if you don't remember, and then you can just come back here and you can click on the help file for the specific command that you're interested in, and you see that as well. Okay, any questions? Okay, perfect. If you have any questions, please just type them in the chats, and then I would respond to them at the appropriate time. Okay, so first thing we want to do, I want to show you how it is to set up a new project. So I'm just going to copy the path to where I want to set it up. You can actually do this without the path, and you can set up a new project with the IPA check command. So you type IPA check new, and when you type IPA check new and hit enter, it will create the folder structure for you, but it will do it in your current directory. I'm currently in my documents and I don't want it there, so I would need to specify that I want it in this specific folder. And when I hit enter, it would create the folder structure and copy the necessary files that I needed into the folder for me. Okay, so everything is done. And if I go back to my folder, I can see that all the folders have been created. I have my zero master do file here, right in the main folder. And then I have my do files folder, my checks folder, and everything else. And you can go through them to make sure that everything is fine. If you are interested in doing the exercise instead, maybe you want to do the exercise and not just create a new project, you would need to include the option exercise. And once you include the option exercise, it will download all the exercise files that you need into the folder. You can also use the option files only, which will just grab the files that you need without creating a folder structure. Okay, great. So now I will go in and then we will walk through the folder structure that we have. And then, yeah. All right, so this is a folder structure that I already set up, and I set up a DMS to demonstrate how it works. So I'm just going to go through this folder structure. I based this on the exercise that is on the GitHub repository. So I was just going through them. So we have an archive folder, which is where you like basically throw in anything that you know is not relevant, but you don't want to delete. Then we have an instruments folder, which is where you keep your instruments. And in here we have a paper version, there's SCTU print and the SCTU XLS, and you can like just put your files in here. You would have to do it manually, of course. We have a do files folder, and we have do files that already come with the DMS when you run IPA check new. So these do files, I already added them to fit your project. We have a checks folder, which is where your checks go. You have a checks input folder where you have your corrections file, your HFC inputs file, and your specified recode file. And this is where you like do the setup that is needed. Then you also have your check outputs folder, which contains the outputs for the different days that you've run. So if you come in here, I ran this specific one a couple of times. You would see that we have the different dates. We have a folder for each of the days that I already ran it. And we have the files in there. So I can basically go in and see what the output was on, this is today, or what it was yesterday. And the dates are arranged in such a way that the current date is at the bottom. That is the last, that would be the last folder that you want. So whenever you run it, you basically are interested in just looking at the last folder. We also have our data folder, which contains our data. We have preloads folder, survey, backcheck, and monitoring data. We have our media folder, which is where you log media files that have been renamed. So this is different from the media file that ServiceCTO creates. This media file that ServiceCTO creates contains the raw media files with the crypted names. And if you rename your media files, you would want to put them in this media folder. Then we have our documentations folder, which is where you put in any documentation that you need. A field manager folder, which you can share with your field manager, and then you can use that as the folder that the folder for correspondence. Then there is a reports folder, which will contain any reports that you want to write. Okay. So that is it with the folder structure, do files and the input files, and then we can go. All right, so first we have our master do file, and this do file doesn't really do much. Basically, what it's doing is setting up Stata for the DMS, and then creating the working directory. And the working directory would be assumed to be the current working directory. So it is best if you always just open the master do file from where it's located, so that it uses that as a current working directory. But you don't have to. You can also just manually switch to that directory before you run this. So it would pick up the current working directory and use that subsequently as you move on. And this section is just running all the other do files that you need. Now, the good thing about this is that if you say you have like multiple surveys and you want to run the DMS, you could basically just copy this and like paste it again. And then you can like set up the globals and the import do file, the prep survey for the other ones as well. And you can specify the names for those ones as well, so that it runs the first survey and then it runs the second survey and runs the third survey. You can also put this in a loop if you are a more advanced user, and that is always the advantage of working in a do file. Any questions so far?
Yeah, hello, Ishmael.
Yes, Isaac.
I'm missing the O3 tracking folder, which used to be part of the folders. Where is it now?
So the O3 tracking folder has been removed. So basically, we are adding that to the checks as well to just make it easier for the number of folders that you have to encrypt. So the tracking output is also just an output. So that has been taken out the tracking folder, and then that also just goes into the checks output. Thank you. That's a very good question.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Babali from Rwanda.
Yes.
In the master do, can you open the master do? Okay.
Sure.
Here in on setup working directory. When your username, let's say my name is Baba Ali, and the username, my laptop, maybe the username, there is a space. There is Baba space Ali. The do file doesn't work.
So it should be fine. Which do file are you referring to?
When we are the master do, when we're running the master do, there is an error message telling you that
yeah, so that should be fine. So basically, the problem is that I think for some of the things that were written there, there are no spaces. When you don't put the path, when you don't put it in a space, when you don't put it in a quotes and it includes spaces, that is when you have those problems. So whenever you have that problem, the solution is just to put the path name in the quotes, and it will work. So you would see that in this specific one, we put them in quotes just to make sure that it will work for everyone, right? So you can basically specify a file path without quotes, and if there are no spaces, Stata will just work with it, and it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Immediately there's a space, then
okay.
Stata is confused because it thinks there are multiple things. Yeah. Thank you for that great question. Any other question?
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so I will just move on. Yeah, so you have your do files folder here, which contains the do files that you need to run. You have the globals, and I'll just pick those do files and put them in the editor so we can go through them. You have your globals do file, which is probably one of the most important do files that you need to familiarize yourself with. And this is a long do file, but nothing to worry about. Most of it is just comments. You don't need to set up 800 lines. But yeah, so most of it is just comments when you look at them, just to make it easier for you to understand what is expected for each of the globals. And you can also collapse them if you feel that it's too long and you just want it to be shorter. Yeah, so you have the globals do file, and this is where you do most of your setup. As you go through them, you would see that they are put in sections, and each of the sections is doing something very specific. So for instance, the first section is where you turn off the turn on or turn off the checks, and this is basically replacing what we had in the inputs file, the Excel sheet, that we had buttons that you could check boxes that you could check to allow or disallow certain checks. That is no longer available. Now you have to do it in the do file. And by default, we've turned all of them to, turn all of them on. And if you are not running a specific check for your project, you can just turn it off by changing the 1 here to 0. Then there's a section where you specify your input files, and for some of them, For some of them, you don't even need to do anything. So for as much as possible, we've tried for each of the do files to put in things that could probably be defaults and don't need to be edited, and you only need to edit them if you really need to. So but for most people, they won't need to edit them. But there are some other ones that we just cannot put defaults for. So those ones you will have to like go through them and think through them and do them yourself. But this is a prime example. In most cases, you will need to edit this section, but it's available for you to edit if you want to. Then there's a section for the data sets where you like specify the data set. So this is specifically a section that you definitely need to edit because we can't know in advance what your data set will be called. So you need to edit this section, and up here you would see a description for each of these globals. So from your raw data set to your prep survey data set to your check survey data set, you can you put all of them in there. Then you have this section which is where you specify where your media folder is. The media folder has the raw data, the raw media files. Then this section that you don't need to edit, we just creates the dates, the date folder for the specific dates. Then a section that you specify all the output files, and we already have like the output files here. If you want to change the names, you can, but you don't really need to. Then there's a section here which you also absolutely need to edit because this has to do with variable names. So these are like important variable names, and these are all the variable names that are required that you have to specify, and these ones are like additional optional variable names that you may include if you have them. And for some of them, like key and like start time and duration and all that, we know like if you're using Service ETU, the variable names are standard, so we would put that in there for you, but you can change them. Then we have a place where you specify your missing values. So these are like values like don't know, refuse to answer, values like that. So you can specify them in here. And for instance, for don't know and refuse to answer, you can specify multiple values. So sometimes you would see that in some surveys, either the programming didn't take care of a specific thing. For some reason, maybe the programming didn't take care of it. People use like 999. So if the default code to use for don't know is -99, people are using 999 or .999 for don't know, and you basically want to like take care of all of this by like specifying, having a space separated list of don't know. You will need to specify you need to specify them separately for numeric and string. Then here you have like additional options. This is a section that you may not really need to come in here. It depends on the kind of checks you want to set up. And you can like go through and you'd see a section for each of the checks with descriptions, and you can like add additional things that you want to add. But for most of them, you won't need to add anything beyond what you've already added. Yeah, so that is basically it. I think the last section is there's also a section for tracking, yes, and then there's the last major part here is the back check section, where you will also have to come and set up for back checks as well. Any questions? Okay, I think there's something in the chat. What is cons vals? Okay, so when you get the input, when you get the sheet, you would see that there's a description for all of them. So for instance, at the top here for cons vals, you'd see that it says num list indicating consent. So example 1, 2, 3, or 1/4 and 12. So this is basically like the values for consent. So if you have a consent variable that has like multiple values indicating consent, you can specify a num list. Otherwise, if it's just a single value, you can specify a single value. So there is a comment for each of the globals. Once you're going through it, just immediately above the globals, you would see like a comment block that has a description of the global. All right, great. Any other question? Okay, so moving on, we have our prep survey which just contains code that you would use to like prepare your data set for the DMS. So for instance, here we import the data and then we like recode the numeric don't knows and numeric refuse to answer to .d and .r. And then there's a section here that you can use to drop your variables. Then there's a section here that you can for destringing your numeric variables as well. Then a section here to check that your key is never missing, which is very important for the IP checks. Then a section here to generate a short key if you rather prefer to use a short key. So when you have like your service-CTO keys, the last 12 digits of your service-CTO key has also been found to be quite unique, even though service-CTO will not really vouch for it, but I have used it quite a number of times and I know that it's unique. I've never had I've never had a problem using the short key. So for those who want to use a short key because it's just easier for people to work with rather than having like a key that is like 40 characters long, you can use a short key. If you don't want to use it, you can just delete the section off and then move on. Then there's also a section that basically checks your dates. So sometimes the enumerators have like their tablets reset and the date goes back to the manufacturing date. And because of that, it like messes up or the date fails in the questionnaire. Ideally, it would be good to like set something up in your service-CTO instrument to check for this and prevent it. But if you don't, you can also have this line there to like basically tell you when you have dates that are like before your date of data collection. So for instance, in this case, we specified January 1st, 2016, but you could make it like January 1st, 2020 or something, so that if it's reset, you will immediately know that enumerator's tablet got reset. Or sometimes, and I think this is the more important reason, sometimes when you download the import do file from service-CTO, it doesn't really correspond with the date formatting of your laptop. So you downloaded the data, in the data, the date format was day, month, year, and in the do file is month, day, year. So because of that, some of the fields would import and some would not import. So you would find that you have like missing dates, or you would find dates that are like just off, right? So having this here also makes you check for those situations. And then there's some additional code here that generates date variables from the date time variables. Yeah, and then if you also like want to drop some observations that were before a specific date, there's some code here for that as well. And as we move on, as more and more people may like, tell us that, oh, I really want to do this. I really want to do this for prep. And if we write in a new code, we would add it to the prep file, and people can always delete the sections of the code that they don't need, or add in additional code that they need to prepare their data. Any questions? Okay, something in the comments. Does the time use code still use text audits, or are there any modifications done to it to use other variables? Yes, so the time use code still uses text audits. It is quite necessary to use the text audit data because that is basically the only way to be sure that the enumerator was administering the survey around the time that is a better estimate. So for instance, if you use like start time and end time, it's not very accurate because I can start the survey after 20 minutes, I stop, and then I like continue like after 5 hours, and that would like show that I was busy the whole day, even though it's not true. But using the text audit allows you to like pinpoint exactly how many seconds after the start time that they were administering that field. Which makes it easier for you to estimate which hours of the day they were active. So yes. Okay, so this is the check do file. So this, you would recognize it used to be called the master check, and this is now check do file. and it's basically doing the same thing that the master check does. Now, in like 90% of the time, you would never need to touch this. Once you do all your setup in the inputs and in the what they call the inputs and the globals, you probably won't need to touch this. So this is really written in a way that it's not really friendly for people to edit. But if you know what you're doing, you can edit it. So you don't have like a lot of comments in here because you probably won't need to touch it. And if you are really coming here to touch it, then you must really know what you're doing before you do that. But you can edit it if you are sure you know what you're doing. You have a lot of experience with the DMS, or you are a very experienced data user. But it's basically running the individual checks. So at the top here, I think like one thing, this was also in the old one. At the top here, it would delete the existing files that you have specified. And then before running the checks. And this is important because when you keep piling, when you keep editing the exact same file, for some reason Stata, well, I actually know why, but when you are doing it in Stata, when you're exporting with Stata to the same Excel file, or you keep editing the same Excel file, the size of the file keeps increasing. And that increases the likelihood of it crashing. So this basically like will delete that file and then like before running the checks again. Yeah, but apart from that, everything else is like same old. Just looks just like the master check. And as I said, in most cases, you really never need to edit this too far. Then we have the, yes, we do have, that's exactly what I was going to next. Thanks, Jared. So after the check survey, there is also a prep backcheck data set. And the prep backcheck data set is basically this, like it's almost the same code that comes from the prep survey data set. So you basically are just like, preparing that one as well for backcheck. And then there is some section of code that I added in here for the specific instrument, which basically created a tracking a master data set to help track backchecks, to help track the backcheck that were done. So this last section is what is different from the original prep, but it's basically the same thing. So you have a prep survey and you also have a prep backcheck. For this specific instrument, the backchecks were done in ServiceCTO, and just to let you know, I think that is probably the best way to do it. If you are doing a data collection that is ongoing and you want to like sample and not have like issues, the best is to just do it in the instrument. So that section of the code just basically made a subset of the observations that were selected for backcheck, and then that would be used as a master tracking data set to track which households have already like tracked the completion of backcheck. Then we have a check BC data set, which basically runs a few checks on the backcheck data. So remember that backcheck data set is not really a data set that you want to check so much, but there are some key important things that you need to check, and that is for duplicates. You want to be sure that you don't have duplicates in your backcheck data set. And this just like runs that section. It runs a IPA check IDs on the backcheck data set, and there's also a section for correcting. And then there's a section for tracking your backcheck, tracking the progress of your backcheck. And you can only do this if you have like if you're able to generate a master data set or a tracking data set. You can also like have a tracking data set that you can use. And then there's this section for the backcheck comparison. So just as the same with the check survey, you would almost never really need to edit this too far. So the do files that you really do need to edit would be the master, and this should be like very minimal, most likely this section, and additional section that you want to add. The global do file, which you have to do a lot of edits to. The prep survey do file, which should have like minimal edits unless you want to add additional prepping steps. and the prep BC do file as well. So most of the work would go into globals and the input file, which is what I'll be looking at next. Any questions before I move into the input file? Okay, great. So now we'll look at the input files. Okay, we'll look at the input files now. So the input files, we have three input files. We have the corrections, the HFC inputs, and specify recode. I'll go through all three of them, but let me start with the HFC input file. So the HFC input file now contains inputs for just 3 of the commands, instead of like 12 or 13 that we had previously. Now it's just 3. And these are like commands that absolutely need the input file. Not that we couldn't do it without it, but the thing is that, and as I go through it, you would see that it is easier to set it up in Excel than to do it in a do file. So the first one we have is the other specify input file, and it's almost basically the same as the old one. So you have like the parent label, the child label, notes, and keep var. So notes is not used. You don't really have to fill it unless you want to keep notes that you think will be relevant to you. Keep vars would be the additional variables you want to see in the output. Then you have what is really required is the parent and the child. So for each row, you definitely need to have a parent and a child. That is not optional. Now, what is good about what is like new about this is that now you can specify repeat group variables. So you have like a repeat group, for instance, if you look on line 3 and 4, we have a repeat group variable that asks for marital status and whether the household head has a leading position, it's a leader in the community, right? So no, whether that the household member has a leadership position in the community. So you can actually go and do like, HR, MR, MAR underscore R1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. But first of all, that takes a long time, and also because it's a repeat group, the data keeps changing, and that means you also always have to come and update it when the size of the repeat group increases. So basically, now you can include a wildcard to say that, in here I want to all the variables marital for all the variables for marital status, I want to check that, and then you can also indicate the same thing for the child variable. Now you need to be a little bit careful here, and some of you, those of you who are very familiar with wildcards, may be wondering why I didn't use a star, because the command would expand the variables, and when you use a star, it may overexpand it, especially with the parent variable. So for instance, you see here that we have the name of the parent variable and the child variable are very similar. So when you use a star for the parent variable, it would include the child variable when it's trying to figure out what the parent variables are, and it would give you an error saying that the parent variables and the child variables don't match, blah blah blah. So it's better to use the question mark because that's like a more specific wildcard. And if you are not very familiar with the wildcards, you can just book some 15 minutes after this session for office hours, and I'm happy to explain how it works. Yeah, so you can do this, and then you don't have to do it. And the program is smart enough to figure out which parent variable matches which child variable. Yeah, so that's basically it for other specify. Any questions? Okay, I see one question. Is it required to add this instead of? Yes, so you can use both, but as I said, you have to be careful. So for instance, in this specific situation, if you have a star and a question mark, it will when it's expanding the parent, it will include the OST underscore R variables, which you don't want because they are not parent variables. So depending on how you name your variables, you'll be the one who will be more familiar with your data set. If you are extremely confident that if you use a star, it won't include other variables that you don't want, you can use that. But if you use if that is not the case, it's better to use the question mark, because that is like more specific and will get you exactly what you want. Any other question? Okay, so moving on, we'll go to outliers. And outliers here, the outliers command here is also almost the same. There are some key differences here. So now I think the key difference that we have here is that so for this one, you can also use wildcards, which is also good. And it would consider this. So if you use a wildcard here, it would consider that all the settings on this row apply, all the additional settings that you've included on this row apply to all the variables that is here. So if you have like a variable that's like maybe household member age, and you can like put HHM. So for instance, if you put HHM age star, all the variables that is in that val list would use the same additional options that you've specified for that row. So each row is seen as like just a single row with like all the settings are like the same. Of course, this doesn't include keep vars, because keep vars applies to everything, and that is why we intentionally put a space in here to like show the difference. So for the different columns, you have a by column which you can use to disaggregate the data. So disaggregate a little bit. So if you say like, I want to check outliers for family size, but I want you to, I wanted to look at it at the district level, because maybe it is known that district A usually has larger families than district B. So you don't necessarily want it to be considered as one, right? So in this case, it would like calculate the interquartile regional standard deviation or whatever it is for just that district, and then use that to flag outliers. Yeah. So and then so that's basically what by is for. Then method allows you to specify for each of the variable lists that you have for each of the rows, if you want to use the interquartile range or the standard deviation method of flagging outliers. So you can basically use like an interquartile range, or you can use a standard deviation. So depending on the one that you want, the default is to use interquartile range. So if you don't want to use interquartile range, you prefer standard deviation for whatever reason, you can just switch it by like selecting standard deviation. Then there's a multiplier column, which basically indicates what multiplier you want to use with your method. So which basically indicates what multiplier you want to use with your method. The default is to use a multiplier of 1.5 for interquartile range, and then 3 for standard deviation. So if you prefer something else, you can specify that. Sometimes you may want to specify different multipliers for different variables. So if you think that like, this variable, like I really don't expect them to be similar enough, so I really want like a wide range for checking my outliers, you can specify this. You can specify it for that variable. And combine allows you to combine, as I already said. If you want to combine, you can say yes, which means that for all the variables, I want you to treat all the variables that are in here like one, like it's one variable when you're calculating standard deviations and interquartile ranges. So that's basically it. Any questions? There is one question here. Okay, so what is the double question mark? So the question mark, so basically the double question mark says like a question mark says like a character, right? So in this specific instance, you are saying I want a variable that starts with FHR_MAR_R and has one additional character. And if you put 2 question marks, it means 2 additional characters, so that you can put as many question marks as you want. The difference is that if you put a star, then it's like 1 or more character. But if you just want one specific character, then that is where you use a question mark. Any other question? All right, so I'll move into the enum stats. And basically enum stats, I think that was already in the old one, but there are some few things that are added here as well. Okay, so someone is asking about the combined column. So basically, so think about it this way. Say you have a data set and you're collecting information about household income. So when you came in, you ask, okay, or like you're collecting information about expenditure. So when you came in, you ask, how much did you spend in January? And they tell you, and then you say in February, and then they tell you in March. When you are checking for outliers with the old one, when you specify those variables are seen as individual variables, right? And it should. But in some cases, you don't really want to see them. When you're trying to flag outliers, the more data points you have, the better it is, because you'll be able to calculate an interquartile range or a standard deviation it's more meaningful. Sometimes if you have your data set in a repeat group, you run the risk of you have one particular variable that has two or three values, and the statistics there are not really that useful. So when you combine, you are saying that consider all the variables for the specific rule as one variable. So consider all the values as values for one variable when you are calculating the interquartile ranges and standard deviation, minimum, maximum, and all that, which allows you to flag outliers more efficiently. No, the IPHX setup program has not been updated to this, so this would be done later. All right, so yeah, so now I move on to enum stats, which basically allows you to see statistics for specific variables at the enumerator level. So let's say, for instance, you want to see statistics about a household member count at the enumerator level. So you want to know which enumerators are reporting the least number of household members, or like the most, or you just basically want to see what the statistics are like. So this is what you would use for that. So here this requires numeric variables. So for instance, with our tablets, we usually collect GPS data, and when we collect GPS data, enumerators can wait to let their accuracy to have better accuracy, or they can just collect the data really quickly. So if you want to check which enumerators are waiting, you can include that as well, and you can check it will tell you the minimum time and the maximum time and the mean, median. You can specify all the statistics you want. You can specify individual statistics for individual rules, and whatever variable that you put in here for all these settings applies for the values that goes in here. So if you put multiple variables here, all of this would apply to that. And you can choose to combine or to not combine as well. The one other thing too is that, let's say if you have a variable does your household have land? Does your household own any land? And that variable actually opens up a group which you feel that maybe enumerators may want to cheat and not want to open up that group. So you want to see the percentage of time each enumerator says yes. So you can include that as well, and you use this option show mean as percentage to let it show it as a percentage. This obviously only works for dummy variables. If you use this for a variable that is not dummy, the results won't make any sense. So yeah, so this is definitely useful for dummy variables. Any questions? Okay, so since there are no additional questions, let me quickly go through the corrections and the specify recode, and then we don't have a lot of time left. Okay, so this is the corrections file. You have it's almost the same as the old one. You have your instructions, or it's the same as the old one actually. You have your instructions here, and then you can generate new sheets. You just input the information in here, and then you add sheets, and you click on add new sheet, and you will generate a new input sheet. Because you are allowed to specify the input sheet like have like multiple, you can have like, and you don't need multiple correction files, just one should work for almost all your DMS. Okay, so yeah, so that's basically it. So that's basically all of it for this one. So you specify the dates, the key, if you are doing duplicates. So if you are checking ID duplicates, it's always better to use key as your ID. But for the other ones, you can use the survey ID. And then you can specify the variable, the label, the value, the new value, and the action that you want to do if you want to drop, okay, or replace. And that's basically it. So it's almost the same as the old one. Or it's the same as the old one, actually. So the other thing is the specify recode input sheet. And this is new, this is different. So this basically allows you to do recode and to recode other specifiers you move on. And basically you can specify in here, you specify in here the parent variable. So say, for instance, if it's marital status, and then the child variable marital order, and then the match type. So you want to say, so basically what you are doing is you are trying to look through the child variables, and if they contain specific values that you are interested in, you want to, if they contain specific values that you're interested in, you want to recode them to something else. You want to recode the parent to something else, right? So you can specify the match type by saying if the child value contains, or if it's exactly equal to, or if it begins with or ends with. And then you can put the match text in here. So let's say we want to say if it is like exactly something. So the marital status is exactly living together. Then we want to recode that to cohabitating. And you could, and then you would recode, you would have to put the other specified value in here. So let's say, for instance, -666. And you want to recode that to, let's say, a new category, 5, cohabitating. And you can like put the label in here. If it is already a pre-existing category, then you don't need a new label. You only need to do that if it's a new category. And it will basically go through marital order, and whenever it finds the value living together, it would recode the original parent to 5 and replace the value for the child value marital order with missing. So this basically allows you to do your recode as you're moving on. It's a much simpler way to do your recode. And the additional benefit here is also that it would give you would get a log file that shows you all the values that have been recoded and the reason why they were there. So that basically the command, the instruction that led to the recode. Any questions? I see some questions here. So
yeah, hello.
Okay.
So for the other specified corrections, is it case sensitive? Because if you want to do match begin, match ends, and all that, is it case sensitive? Hello, Sean, can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, we can hear you again. Yes.
Yes, so I was asking whether the corrections for the other specified is case sensitive, because you can type the label. So if you are doing match contains, begins and all that, you need to find out whether it's case sensitive or not. Thank you, Carlos. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, did Ismail leave?
I'm back. Sorry, I think my internet just like gave up on me.
No worries. Ismail, they are asking about the labels if they are case sensitive in the other specify.
Yes, they are case sensitive. But yeah, they are actually case sensitive, yes. So the other thing that you need to, the other thing that I didn't mention, which is very important, is that this also, if you're an advanced user and you already know how to use regular expression, this also allows, this also accepts regular expressions. So you could play a little bit along with your regular expressions here when you're using it. Yeah, so I would always advise, one of the things that I always advise is that when you have your B code, you should always convert all of them to the same case, whether lower or upper, so that it's easier for you to do them. You don't have to think too much about whether you got the case right or wrong. But it is, yes, it is case sensitive. All right, so I do have some questions here. Yes, so I was talking about the location. You would have to collect multiple data points to be able to check that. And there are some data commands that you can use to check, how close those GPS points are, and you can check if they are at the same location. But this would require collecting multiple GPS points, which would probably kill the battery of the tablet. So on enums, the other question is on enum stats, the percentages, median, etc. reflection of the enumerator survey only, or is this everyone else in the team? So it is, when I open the output, you will see that. So it is showing it for specific enumerator. So for each enumerator, what's their statistics are for that variable. It's another question, maybe not relevant. Is there a way you can monitor whether enumerator state? Oh, that's the same question I already answered. Oh, I would propose using BAP. Yeah, okay. So I think someone is also providing an answer to you. Okay, so Jimmy, will there be notes in the new input file, like the old input file, that explain the required option checks? No, so there are no notes in the input file, but if you look in the globals do file, there are some descriptions there on what needs to be done, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Is there other specified recode applicable to repeat variables too? Yes, there are. Yes, absolutely. So you can specify repeat variables here, but as I said, with all the commands that work with repeat variables, you have to be careful to make sure that when you put in the var list here and the var list here, the number of variables here and the number of variables here need to match. Otherwise, you'll get an error and it will tell you that you have this here and you have like 5 variables here and 15 variables there. Okay, so I am running out of time, and I really want to show you the output. So I will jump into that and show you the outputs. So this is basically the output folder, and here you have like the different outputs. Let's start with the tracking. So we'll open our tracking data sets, and then in here you would see the tracking. So you see that here, what is different from between this and the previous one is that we no longer have the colors that we had in proc reports. Yeah, so that's basically one of the key differences here. Okay, and then after tracking, let me go to the outputs. Let me go to the output. So this we'll start with a duplicate sheet, and this is what a duplicate sheets look like. It looks very similar to the summary sheet of the previous duplicates command. The only difference here is that now you can add keep variables to the duplicate sheets, the duplicate summary sheet, so that in most cases you can resolve the duplicates without looking deep into the data. But if you also need to look into the data, then there's like another DTA file that is exported that you can use. Then here we have our form version. So this has actually had a radical change. There's a big change in the output. You can see here that now we have, like, on this section, we have the individual form versions, and then it shows the number of submissions, the number of times it was submitted when it wasn't the latest version. the first date of submission and the last date of submission for that specific form. And you have that for all the forms. So this is like an easier output than the previous one. And it also you also get a sheet called outdated, which shows you all the forms that were submitted. All the forms that were submitted when they were actually outdated. Then you have a duplicate sheet, which you can use to like check duplicates for other variables. So this is the other IPHX dupes. This is the output of IPHX dupes, and this is the output of missing, which basically has like, which shows you for each of the variables. So here now you have like all the variables in there, and it shows you the number of values missing and the percentage of values missing, and then the number of distinct values, and then in here it shows you whether it was a priority variable or not, in which you can indicate in the global file. So basically, this is like the priority variables are like variables you care so much about. You want them to always show up at the top, and that, generally it sorts the list by missing number of missing values. But if you include a variable as priority, then it brings it to the top regardless. So yeah, so right here you have like everything, and you can like check, you can see all the variables, the percentage of missing for each of the variables that you have in your dataset. Then you have your outliers here, your output for outliers, which is also a little bit different, because now you have like, it indicates whether this was combined or not, and what variables it combined to calculate statistics. What the value is flagging is the number of non-missing values, the minimum, mean, maximum, the range, and all that. Then you have your other specify. You have your other specify output as well. And then you have, so for other specify, you have an additional sheet which shows you the choice list for that specific variable and the percentage of times that specific choice list was selected, and also shows you so the choice list, the number of times it was selected and the percentage of time it was selected. So this will just help make it easier for you to figure out like what to recode something to. And then you have your field comments here, and then here we also added our backcheck ID duplicates. Then let's open the time use. Okay, let's open time. We ran out of time. So yeah, so this is basically what it looks like, and then it shows you. It makes it easier for you to see which sections of the day that your enumerators are busiest, and you can see that for specific dates. And so for instance, for this one, we can see that enumerators are most active during the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So this makes it easier for you when you are planning your field visits. There's also another sheet that is for specific enumerators. So if you are visiting a particular enumerator, you can check and see when they are mostly active. Then we have the survey dashboard, which has the summary sheet that I showed earlier. And you can also get the same summary statistics grouped. So if you want it by district, you can get it by district. Then you have productivity, can be weekly or monthly or daily as well. Then you also have an enumerator dashboard. You have an enumerator dashboard, which is, sorry, Carlos, I think we are out of time. Maybe I'll need like 10 more minutes to go through all the outputs. I don't know, maybe if you need to drop off, I think you can. And then I'll just like take a few minutes. I know I'm supposed to have a session with someone immediately right now, but like, yeah. Okay, that's fine if we stay like 5 minutes. Yeah, so those who need to drop, who absolutely need to drop off, that's fine. We are recording the session. We'll post a video and you can like review the last section. But those who can stay on, that would be great. I'll just take like 10 more minutes or less, and then go through this. Okay, so for the enumerator, we have a summary sheet that contains like useful information and for each enumerator. So we have the number of submissions, the consent rates, missing rates, don't know, refuse, other specified, minimum duration, mean duration, median duration, maximum duration, the number of form versions used by the enumerator, the first date of survey, the last date of survey, and the total number of days, individual days that the enumerator has worked. You can also get a summary by team if you include a team variable, and you can get productivity information at a weekly level for each enumerator, or daily or monthly. You can also get that for team, and then this is where you have your enumerator statistics. This is where you would see like all the statistics for each of the enumerators, and you see that this is like now different design. The output is now designed differently to make it easier for you to use. Now, the good thing about having all of this in Stata is that even though they are not, as I said, Excel, is that even though they are not colored, you can always add in some color if you want to. So if you, for instance, are interested in like this, you can add conditional formatting to this by just like doing this color scales, and then yeah, boom, you have your conditional formatting. Yeah. And I think that is about it. So then we have our backcheck comparison, and then our backcheck tracking. We have a backcheck comparison here, as well as our backcheck tracking data as well. So I think that's basically the key ones that I need to go through. Let me check if there are any questions. Okay, so Timeuse, can you explain the scale, please? So the scale basically tells you, like the colors are basically telling you how many surveys were done within that hour, how many times you had activity within that specific slot. So if the hours are like deeper green, then it shows you like what that means. The most important thing there is like the colors just basically makes it easier for you to visualize which parts of the day they were most active. But then if you also want to know like specifically, how active they were, then that is when you need to look at the numbers. But the numbers are basically telling you how many times they were active during that specific slot. I think the rest were okay. The rest were like responses to other people. Yeah, so that's it. Any other questions?
Ishmael.
Yes.
Yes. With the enumerator being active, does that depend on they are syncing the data or when their phones is open during that period?
If they are administering a survey during the period.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? So Timeuse, it can basically use whichever you want. This particular one is set up to use the checked data, so they deduplicated data set. So someone is asking if Timeuse uses the raw data or the prep data. So in this specific scenario, it's set up to use the deduplicated data set. Any other question? All right, so Carlos, I think I'll hand it over back to you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. And thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, Ishmael, for that comprehensive show on the DMS4. Now we would have like open discussion and time, but because we are already over time, I think we can just leave it in there. And remember that Ishmael will be available for the next block of time. You all have been invited, and you can sign up for 15 to 30 minutes small meetings with him. So just use them if you need, and remember that there will be 2 more of these blocks of time. So see you later, and thanks for everything.